Okay, so you're going to want to get your stuff together to get ready to do the rest of this lab. I pulled the digital multimeter out of the box. You want to make sure that it turns on. You can check that by just going and turning this dial, and you can turn it to anything really. You should see some numbers appear. Don't worry about what it is. We'll show you how to use the meter in just a second. The next thing you're going to want to do is take your wires that came with the meter, and one's red, one's black. That's just for convenience because, as we'll see in a second, there's a positive and a minus on the meter. These probes just allow you to touch different points in our circuits and will help us do our measurements. So the first thing you're going to want to do is take your black wire and plug it into the COM all the way to the right. COM stands for common, which really in this case means ground, which is the low voltage side of things. You're then going to want to take your red wire and plug it into the one that has a whole bunch of letters. It says V, ohm, MA, and then has a little symbol by it. The V stands for voltage, which we'll be measuring. The ohm stands for resistance, which we'll also be measuring. And the MA stands for milliamps, so you don't have to worry about that. So now your meter is ready to go. You're going to want to take your light bulb holders and label them. I labeled them 1, 2, 3 so that I can keep track of which bulb is which. And then you can screw your light bulbs into the holders. You want to make sure they're snug, but be careful, these aren't the toughest light bulbs in the world. Don't twist them so hard that you'll break them. It doesn't matter what bulb that you put into which holder. What matters is we just want to be consistently, when I say use bulb 1, that you consistently use bulb 1, and similarly with 2 and 3. I have my wires out of the bag. When we have our wires, you'll notice they have what we call little alligator clips on them. You can actually pull these little covers back. If it's a little hard, they can be a little slippery to try and use. To use the alligator clip, you just want to hold it open and pinch it open like that. When we use our wires, we're going to want to clamp onto these little metal pieces on the bulbs or onto the little wires on our holder. So you might want to just check to make sure that your holders can clamp onto it. You may need to unscrew these bulbs just a little bit just to make absolutely sure that you can get a good grip. Otherwise, if it seems to hold when it's down, if not, otherwise you can just take your screwdriver, and you don't really have to loosen them very much, just a little bit. That will let you get a slightly better grab on the little screws there. And then the last thing is I put my D-cell batteries into the holder. Just their standard way you put batteries even into a flashlight. This flat side, the negative terminal goes against the spring. And so you just push it in, push it in. Notice there are 2 bare wires there. One thing you want to be a little careful of is that you don't let those 2 wires touch each other directly. So you just want to watch it so that you're not touching those 2 wires to each other by accident. You can actually test your bulbs really quick by just taking the wires and putting them one on one side, one screw, and the other on the other screw, and you should see the bulbs light up. And again, I can just test them all really quick, make sure that all my bulbs are working and that my battery pack is working, so that's all good. Now, the first thing you want to do, and you'll see this in a table below where I ask you to write down the resistances of the bulbs. Okay, and we're going to do that by measuring directly. Earlier in the lab and in lecture, we saw that you remember that resistance was voltage over current, but this meter will actually let us measure resistance directly. Now, when you look at this meter, you'll see several different regions on it. You see it says a V and it has a little twiggly line by it. That stands for alternating current. We're not going to use that. The numbers stand for the maximum reading on the dial. So that if you're not getting a good reading here, you can always change the reading. Over here is current. We're actually not going to measure that. And you can see down on the bottom, this yellow region down here, we have ohms. Now, this should not be all that much resistance, so I'm going to take this dial and I'm going to turn it until I get to the 200. So that means this will read a maximum of 200 ohms. Okay, and so this will tell us our reading of our resistances. And so You can always double check to make sure your ohm meter is working correctly. Now here you can touch them together directly, so if I touch them, I essentially am measuring the resistance of wires, which should be very, very small, and I should get a number that's pretty close to 0. Okay, to measure the resistance of our light bulbs, I take one wire on one side, and I take one wire on the other side, and I touch and I just push it into it. And you can see that it jumps around a little bit, and if it's doing that, then you just want to make sure that you're pushing nice and robustly so that you can get a measurement. And so that says that I have 0.7 ohms of resistance. Okay. So I expect the resistance of these to be pretty small. This actually might be about 0.65 since it seems to be jumping between the two numbers. The resistances should be fairly small and you shouldn't worry about it. Go ahead and then do that with bulbs 2 and 3. Now you might be saying, do I have to worry about which side I put the red one on and which side I put the black one on? For this particular measurement, actually, no, you don't. Doesn't matter. Notice that if I flip, and I were simply to flip my leads here, okay, I still get a measurement of 0.7. That's because resistance is a property of the light bulb, and it really doesn't matter which direction I measure it. For some later measurements, indeed, we're going to want to be careful with that. And I'll make sure that you understand where we have to be very careful about which side we're touching it to. Okay, with all this, you should have your experiment set up. So measure the resistances of your 3 light bulbs and record them in the table below, and then we'll be set to set up our first circuit.